awesome things going on. So I do encourage anybody who's listening or watching or present today in some shape or form to definitely look into that DBA SIG grant, because it helped us scale Uncomfortable X, and Barb and I really wouldn't be here today sharing research with you that hopefully will help you leverage services and really practice the values that I know that we all share in terms of wanting to scale the science to all populations and all people and have equity. So yes, thanks again to DBA SIG. All right, so I am here presenting this today because we do have a lot of research on linguistic diversity and healthcare, but not so much per se for how language diversity impacts services, particularly, I'm going to keep the focus on today, in the United States and within our healthcare system, so that when we talk about cost-benefit analysis, you know, and then budgets and how the heck do we fund services to help us meet the needs of our linguistically diverse communities, it's so much easier just to focus on United States law right now. So I welcome you to Linguistic Diversity and ABA Service Delivery. And again, I'm Megan Kirby or Megan Sullivan Kirby, depends on the day and response effort, weakens my MO to say my full name. But yes, I am a co-founder of Uncomfortable BCBA. All right. So I do want to go over quickly the behavior analytic content, because that's important. For those of you who are students or RBTs, I've included this information for you, and those of you who are earning CEs. So we've got the RBT task list, just the most recent second edition. Tomorrow they could come out with something new. So I apologize, but I'm going off that. And then the 4th edition task list, only because the 5th one is crazy. And I'm not doing that right now. So, and then the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code are sometimes abbreviated with PECC or PECCBA, in case you see that. This particular presentation definitely goes in with the beautiful, one of our favorite topics, which is what? Boundaries of competence. Like, oh, I can or cannot do something as a behavior analyst based on my scope of competency. It also has to do with integrity and professional relationships as well as scientific ones. And then what are our duties to our clients or potentially future clients? So just a quick overview of what we're going to go over. We're just going to do definitions together, but then we're going to get into the why. Like, why should I care as a behavior analyst, whether or not I am providing services to a linguistically diverse community? I don't know. Or I already go into this question with, I don't speak more than one language. And so if I don't, how the heck am I supposed to adapt? And I can't, and it's not feasible. So I do want to make sure that all of these things will get covered in this presentation today. This is a big number, 14 million. And actually, in America, 14 million individuals do not speak English well or at all. And so what does that constitute? What is that number made out of? Well, 9 million do not speak English well. That means that they are second language learners, dual language, English as a third language, but their primary language spoken at home when they were raised was not English. The other part, 5 million individuals do not speak English at all, and they live in America and they are not fluent in English. But I do want to note that we do include in that 5 million, 1 million whom are deaf or hard of hearing, and so their primary language is going to be ASL or American Sign Language. So we do want to be cognizant of the term, or the term speak is also going to be inclusive of speak, which is, here's the sign, y'all. So that was my undergrad. All right, so since we know that we have this huge 14 million people, and if you want to do the math, which I actually wish I did, if 1 in 53, I believe right now, and someone can correct me, which is the rate of autism, since most of us are practitioners in a behavior analytic sense in terms of how we make our money, might be in providing behavior analytic behavior therapy services to individuals who are have some kind of limitation or need for our behavior therapy services, right? So that's a huge number of individuals we are not providing services to if we are individuals who are only primary English speakers, like myself. I'm not fluent in ASL anymore. So linguistic competency is what we need to talk about. And if we think about our scope and what are our limitations if we are primary English speakers, we have to think about linguistic competency as a test. There are tests of linguistic competency. Are you a medical interpreter? Are you just kind of in an informal setting and you get me a cerveza and it just comes out and I can just deal? So, or maybe you're someone who grew up in a dual language home, but as you grew, you lost contact with any formal properties of a language, and you might speak a kind of hybrid of multiple languages based on your environments and the context and the reinforcement history. So would we consider someone to be linguistically competent in that language? And so when it comes down to medical services, no, no. You must have an interpreter. So let's say, and actually I do want to find out right now for those of you who are participating, if you can in the comments section, how many of you have worked with an interpreter before? And that being said, like an official interpreter, whether it be for personal reasons, but you have to hire, whether it be for work, and work being in a behavior analytic practice, or maybe in some other shape or form, or maybe at school. And so what is your interaction and history of working with interpreters? And interpreters, mind you, are different than translators. Translation services are different. So interpreters are going to interpret for a person, and it's going to be vocal or verbal behavior, that's speaking or sign. Translation services tend to be textual. So to make that distinction, we've got a couple people that have used it, interpreter services. Okay. Man, so I, in my prior practice, had not, until I had a family that was receiving refugee resettlement services. And so they came to America and they were linked with these services, and it was a part of a package deal that they had in resettlement for 1 year. And so I had access to an interpreter who had to translate, and we'll get into this, had to translate behavior analytic jargon to a family, and they were not a behavior analyst. So, nor were they a medical professional at all. So this was a family that spoke a language from a tribe in Africa that was so hard, and I cannot pronounce it today. So it's hard already to find those individuals. Let's just think, if we don't have interpreters and we decide to take on a client or work with a consumer or perform, not perform, I hate that verb. If we're going to have a research study and we decide to accept a participant who is not fluent, and we are not fluent in their language, and there's this reciprocity there of there's no linguistic competency, what could possibly go wrong? And I think that that's the hesitation of, we imagine all the worst things in the world, or we may not, based on prior history. So let's just kind of sit with this thought of what kind of individual are we? And those in attendance, are you a risk taker? Are you one that says, well, if I don't provide services, even if I don't try my best to model, right, or show videos or use Google Translate, if I just don't try anything, who else is this person going to go to? Like, where are they going to get services? If I'm the only one in the city or the state or the town in that locale, it's either me or nothing. And I truly believe in like the science. Or you might be, oh boy, no, I'm totally apprehensive. I might mess something up, and like heaven knows. And then that third other person won't do anything and will just pretend like there's not a gap between implementation of services or delivery of services to culturally and linguistically diverse clients. They're just going to pretend that because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that there are people suffering without services. Yeah, that's a lot of guilt there too. So that's a whole nother training. But here's what could happen if we don't provide interpreters or we don't consider anything to help individuals. We've got Van Houten's 1988 paper, right? Unequal access to effective treatment. This is one of those seminal papers that if you are a student on the or an RBT right now on this webinar, yeah, this is going to be on your test. So the unequal access to effective treatment basically goes into if we don't have linguistic competency and we can't explain effectively our services, the individual receiving the services will have poor comprehension of what it is they're getting. This is one-on-one with informed consent, right? So how are we going to inform them and how are they consenting if they don't know what the heck they're about to get into? Poor adherence. So I might take on an individual client and work with them in a clinic setting, and the child is learning language anyway, and I don't have access to an interpreter. But when it comes time for parent or family training and to generalize and maintain those skills that we learned in one setting, which might be super easy, the adherence isn't there because I can't explain. And we can get into how poor Google Translate is, especially for behavior analytic terms. And any of you want to do a study on that, please do, because it does not exist, the use of that. But the poor adherence is going to be right there. So the next one is then the poor quality of services. Let's say we're teaching tax or MANS or anything. I really got some people right here who know about this international and multilingual. This is good. I like this participation. So we've got this poor quality of services because I'm going to pick words that are primary to my language that I am most competent in. And in addition to the fact that, let's just put aside that we have an adherence to nouns and verbs, but in Spanish right now, and I'm working on a research project, adjectives are so much easier to learn than nouns and verbs. It's the other way in English. So actually adjectives are the hardest. And so we're doing a randomized control trial right now of why that is, and verbal behavior should be informed by that, but we've never thought about that before. So why the heck am I teaching nouns and verbs to a child who comes from a Spanish-speaking home when adjectives are more commonly used? There's more adjectives to describe something. I don't know if anybody here, well, I do know a couple people. In the Spanish or Valeria, you have your Portuguese too, that you can, and French, get into all of these. But if you want to come home and say hi to your dog, and Annie, I can even use you. How many adjectives are you using to be like, oh, I love you, little cute puppy? Like, do you use a string of adjectives? How did I know? How did I know? Because I'm going to come home and I'm like, hey, cat, like, I got a noun. That's it. So these are the aspects of things that we're talking and what the importance of vocabulary and linguistic competency. So if you're not already feeling disheartened as a primary English speaker like myself of, oh, I've already messed up so many kids, don't worry. Haven't messed them up. You're fine. But you may have poor stakeholder satisfaction, which again goes back to maintenance and generalization, which is if the family doesn't know why you're teaching these words, they trust you with all their heart and they truly believe in you and love what you're doing with their child. Yeah, you might have definitely some kind of dissatisfaction later on when they figure out that their child is not transferring any of those skills from the clinic to the home or from the school to the home. So there is going to be research, and I don't want to do a plug for Uncomfortable, but I will, because Dr. Anna Garcia has multiple studies going on right now, and papers in review, fingers crossed, but studying like how do behavior analysts then ask parents for the list of words before we go and teach them. So what words, if I'm going to do functional communication training, when I find out that I need to have these words as replacement for problem behavior, what are the mands for I need a break? Or what are the things that they want that they're manding for that I need to use for FCT? Well, that should come from the family first before I make any recommendations. In fact, what she found is that if I am super helpful as a behavior analyst and I have the answers, I know exactly what it is, and I observed and they asked for this thing and that's what I'm going to throw on the plan, that's my tendency, I actually would do better if I'm given a piece of paper that's blank and actually have to give it to the family and have them write it down before I try to help them. So there are some actual tips, and there's research coming out again, and she will be presenting information on that and data. But again, then it can come to us. So there's nothing wrong with being selfish. It's about us too, and so I don't provide services for free. It would be unethical if I did, because I don't do it for everybody. So there is a bit of a, it's my job and I really care and I'm doing all these things. And if I note or I believe that a client, caregiver, other stakeholder is not adhering or trying any of the things that I'm recommending, yet my own satisfaction rate is going to go down. My job satisfaction. And so it's not at the fault that I'm going to blame the families, but if I'm not competent in the first place with communication, this inevitably is going to happen. And then again, we get into more assessment and worsening conditions. Because if I'm trying, I could have asked a question or could have clarified something in the beginning, we wouldn't need these last two to be on this slide. So the errors in treatment decisions kind of go with that worsening conditions. So my selection of vocabulary terms or words, or my approach to language instruction, right? Or the fact that maybe I didn't understand that the client was demanding for the removal of something because I did not understand the language that they were using. That might be a primary home language. Ahoy! Like, it gets overwhelming into, what is our problem? Well, all of those things. Those things are our problems. So now, let's look into like, what is language policy? So in the United States, we have Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So way back, right? And this one right here absolutely relates, well, not absolutely. It does relate in terms of we have to ensure equal access to persons who have limited English proficiency. So we're not testing them. So there's, let's put a pin in that one right there. And what does equal access really mean? And so if I provide services for through Medicaid, I can tell you right now, or I provide services in a school setting that receives public funds right now, I should be a little bit curious about this and writing this down, and I'm probably going to go read into it. Right? I definitely don't want to scare anybody, but it does exist. And so if we need to think about equity and health disparities, and one of the things that we can solve is providing translators and interpreters, then what is it worth, right? So from values-based, but then we also have to balance capitalism and say we have to have a job and get paid. So what is it going to be worth to us? But the caveat is we've got this law, right, or this act, and it has no funding tied to it. So we're told that we have to provide equal access to services to those who have LEP, limited English proficiency, but they're not going to give us any money for us to do so. So, okay, that's probably why most of us are here today and had no idea about this, is because then it's not really being adhered to, because it can't, like, who's going to pay for this, right? So therefore there's no enforcement. So I do want to note, like, it does exist, but there's no funding, and because there's no funding, the argument then from businesses and from a standpoint is you can't force us to do something and then also set these really low rates for pay and then tell us to go above and beyond where it's going to cost us more, probably out of pocket to provide services if I want equal access. So the rate then is going to be $60 an hour for Medicaid. That's just a blanket rate in Virginia for most of the state for Medicaid services, so including behavior analysis for behavior problems. So $60 an hour, well then when I went to go find a translator after a few months for a family, it was $80 an hour for an interpreter. So if you want to think about it, then how and who is responsible for paying for that? And if I don't comply and I'm trying my best, okay, I'm not going to be locked up in an orange jumpsuit. So there's the concern out the door, just push it away. So there's another thing called Executive Order 13166. And if you're not familiar with executive orders, they do not stand, they're not laws. Someone needs to repeal them though, as we've seen recently with a lot of them. So this said that agencies are responsible for funding services at zero cost to the consumer. So what was happening is that families would sign up for services or be referred to medical providers. The doctor would say, I don't have an interpreter, but I can provide one for you. And then the family would get the bill in the mail or tacked onto their total that they were responsible for. And we're not informed of that up front. So there's all sorts of problems with that. But what had to happen is that an executive order came out and then said, hey, you can't do that. So there are legal loopholes in this, right? So this is the whole fact that it's an executive order and it's not actually a law. How you go about charging a client. If you have to have long meetings or it goes above a certain duration, you can set that, and then they're responsible for translation services after that. I've seen that happen too. So that's it. I mean, like, it's just two policies, but one is federal and then the other one is in the executive branch. So right now, as it stands, is federal and has not been repealed. But realistically, if we were going to go in this contingency of like, yes, we have this, we have these problems, we have these laws to help clients access services and the right to effective treatment, but also equity and reducing health disparities that occur because of just language. What if there's not a whole bunch of individuals who are bilingual or multilingual at all to provide services to these individuals? What if, like in Harrisonburg, Virginia, there are 173 languages spoken, and there's no way in heck one provider knows all of those. I've yet to meet someone who knows 173 languages. Here in Tampa, which is more of a metropolitan, a bigger city, there are 170 or so languages spoken, and that's again going back to the refugee resettlement. And so that's why Harrisonburg was also in that case. So if they were a site where refugees were resettled when they were seeking asylum or so on and so forth, they are more likely to have access to medical care providers, or they're more likely to just have access to interpreters. So that is more common. However, what about the rest of America? So there's also no certification guidelines for interpreters as of right now. And so there are classes, there's coursework, but there's not actually like a guideline for what they're supposed to do in terms of medical interpreter services. You could be an interpreter, but it's much different if you are really good at it at a bank versus a school versus in a medical office. There's also guidelines as to male and female. So imagine, I was speaking with some individuals, I believe they were from Kenya. Yes. And they were refugees who were resettled in Tampa. And I think the husband and wife were going to a doctor's appointment, and it was the husband who was the patient. Well, the interpreter was a female, and the wife was in the room as well. And while they were interpreting for the doctor there, they were saying words, body appendages like penis, for example, that were very offensive for this man who's the patient for his wife to hear. And so without guidelines, and again, going back to just training and maybe like being aware of cultural significant differences, right, then that would help. But if there's no guidelines and who's going to pay for it, we're back at square one. And then the next one is that there's just no curriculum for us as providers, and we haven't been trained, and that's why we're kind of here today, just to start talking about it. But there's no curriculum with how to work with interpreters at all. So how many of you actually, I mean, I'm going up, so the ones that have worked with an interpreter before, did you know what to do or what not to do? Or maybe even if you haven't really worked with one yet, do you know that there are rules? There's just etiquette. Put a Y for yes and N for no. Okay. All no's so far. Okay, good. Hilarious, skewing my sample. So, and Christian. All right, so yes, there's etiquette, and we'll get into that. I'm gonna save the best for the last. Okay. So here is what happens currently. Let's say an interpreter, we're lucky. We have the interpreter, the family has access to them. So they came to one of our treatment plan meetings with the interpreter. And I tell the interpreter, hey, so the child seems to have problem behaviors on like Monday and Tuesday, and I know they have ADHD, and I know they're prescribed medicine, but are they getting the medicine? Because I notice a change, significant change later in the week in rates of behavior and just the types of behavior. So I say, please ask them. And then the parents go, well, sometimes like we just have to limit dose. Mind you, they're also probably saving money, but they're limiting the dose over the weekends. Then I say to the interpreter, well, tell them that they need to take the medicine. Like, this kid needs the medicine. So any idea of what may happen? If there was no interpreter services, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Because of cost, but let's say they came with it, but let's also say that they weren't trained in medical practices. Well, when they were telling the family that they need to take the medicine, it comes with disdain, and this interpreter is caught between two positions of reprimanding a family, but also knowing the cultural background and history of the family, possibly. And that's exactly, Christian. You don't know whether or not you're going to offend, and you're putting that third party in a very difficult position. So it's just, yeah, it gets really mucky. But some of the things that we think of, it's nice to be able to tell someone else something and interpret for you. I've done that before with friends. But I mean, not for work, but with friends. But for this, let's say the rest of you don't have access to interpreters that work in your office or all the time, and they're not free. So cost of an excuse of that $80 an hour when I'm only getting $60 an hour meeting with this family, that means I have a loss of $20. And that's just for the treatment plan meeting. How often, and I have to make a decision as, okay, well, maybe I can get by with that and say, okay, when I have treatment plans, I'm just going to chalk it up as a loss, because most of the time, like, obviously we're making money because I have a job, but then I'm going to chalk it up to, okay, that is worth it because I feel like I am doing what I am ethically and morally responsible for doing and helping this family understand services. The rest of the time I might be doing ad hoc interpreters. I may be just picking someone who's available, who's walking down the hallway and I know they speak Spanish, and just like pulling them into a meeting, which we'll get into the ethics of that. And I might be using a service like Google Translate, or there are a couple of translation services like phone systems where you can call in and they can provide services through like a warehouse. I think of it as a call center. There are a couple places that do that. Now, the fee can be substantial, and they say that they are trained, but again, there's no certification, by the way. So also they can be very unprofessional, like extremely unprofessional. In Sudan, depends on what tribe you are, but I have worked with a family with another researcher, and we were making a call, and because the other researcher actually spoke Swahili, he understood that the translator was saying that this family wasn't really from Sudan. They're not true Sudanese because of the tribe that they came from, right? So we wouldn't have known that if he didn't already speak Swahili and understand. And so I think when we go into this too, like, we need to know and trust the services that we're getting and have a relationship with them. And I didn't put it on here, but who has time for that? I don't know. So that, I got ahead. Interpreter services that we're getting, we're using them because we have a fear. We have to be rule governed, right? And compliance. We have those two like federal like laws. Like, am I going to get arrested if I don't do this? So I definitely think that like the compliance aspect, out of fear of doing something wrong or getting in trouble and medical malpractice or whatever, is real, but also that fear of what if we don't provide services and we say, I'm sorry, I can't serve you because we don't have anybody who's fluent in your language or remotely speaks it. Could we get sued? Which we could. So another option that we have, and okay, good. phone interpreter for Creole crisis call. Annie, I used to volunteer for a crisis call center in undergrad. Hoy. Okay, so did you use video services or it was just phone? It was just phone. Okay. Sometimes now we're going to step up in cost when you have a video like third party and they almost participate in the meeting. It's a remote version of live, so that can get really, really costly because you also need the technology for it. So either it's going to be a phone app or a mobile app, and I can share these things with y'all like later on, but in that note, it does exist. And then let's just add this in here too. Again, just going to remind us that we do not have formal training in how to work with interpreters. Like I didn't. And as a behavior analyst and someone who's told to go forward and go deliver services to kids, had no idea about laws, want to help, doing my best, sometimes just winging it. And to be honest, when it came time to actually interact with interpreters, when I had access to them, I didn't realize what I was doing was pretty bad. So when we get into recommendations, and then I'm going to tell you about what happened, then we're going to kind of summarize this and wrap this up so that we can participate. So we need the infrastructure. And if we're in a position of power, that's great. Like you can decide, hey, we're going to have someone who's going to help us on board, and we're going to find interpreter. We're going to have some kind of workflow for when we need interpreter services. Then we need to have compatibility. So from a systems level, yes, we have the structure, but then it has to align with our values and our technologies and our systems and our billing. Like all of that needs to be in place. And then we need to make sure that it's all aligned with service delivery and implementation. So when are we using interpreters? How long are we going to need them? How do we schedule those appointments? Do they actually go into the homes if we're home-based service providers, or do we just use them in the office, and at what schedule? And if we have this in a workflow, it makes sense, and then we can justify why we do what we do. And so what we base this on is basically this, what is called the SOCA, and it's a systems of care assessment. And what it does is look at providers and healthcare agencies. Do they have the infrastructure? And it gives us a map and how to assess our own agencies, whether we're the owner or we're just a worker. And then how well are we actually from idea and conceptualization of the problem, right, that we need interpreters, to actually implementing it with that middle one, the compatibility of cost savings, cost benefit analysis, and those things. So just a note on infrastructure, there are ideas that other people have had. Language assistance department, if you work for a large agency or public service agency or a school, those should exist. That's just specifically for reducing health disparities based on language. And that would be based on our values, on our company policies, on hiring practices. They're overseeing all of these things. How do we pay for them? They would be responsible for that. And budgeting for it. Oops. So just to assess, like in an ideal world, and we are a large, like over 500 people, this would be great. I would say over 300 actually. This would be great, but that's not the real world. But then on service delivery, again, ideal. So those language assistance services would be responsible, or that department could also say like, okay, how do we access? At what point am I a BCBA or an RBT and say, hey, I got this family, you know what? They said they spoke English and they're proficient in it, but they're not. And I really feel like we need some supplemental services. So how can I get an interpreter to this house? Or how can I get an interpreter and where do I need to go? So access, so scheduling. Availability, scheduling. Utilization. Let's say I ordered or like scheduled use of an interpreter, but turns out the family canceled and now they're not needed. Well, I have to pay this person now. Like I have to pay them. So what else am I going to use them for? So there was a creative idea when I met someone who worked at a very small agency and hired someone specifically as an interpreter, but then had them do other duties as performed, but had a clerical job for them. So when they were not used for interpreter services, and I believe this was in LA, then they had a full-time paid job. It wasn't going to be a problem if there were no call, no shows, because there's plenty for them to do, like filing or other work. So I liked that. That was good problem solving. And then the fourth thing is they're going to train. So I promised it, and I'll tell you. So training of how to use interpreters is pretty quick and simple. So I'll give it to you. If I have access to an interpreter and they come to a session and their job is to interpret for the family as well as for me, I'm going to meet with them. I'm going to ask them what their preference is. Where do they want to stand or sit? Where do they prefer? And then I want them to be positioned in between the family and I. I need to be looking at the family. Because here's what happened. I just spoke to that, that interpreter the whole time. I just spoke to them, and when the parents would talk, I would look to the interpreter, then to like interpret for me, and then it was the rudest, now in retrospect, it was the rudest thing I could possibly do, because I was not meeting with the family anymore, and they're my client. And so it's so rude. It also makes them feel as if I value people who speak English more than I do them. And so when you work with an interpreter, you want to put that person in between you and the family or caregivers, whoever your client or consumer is. And you want to speak slowly, but not weird. Just be as concise as possible. That's very difficult for me. But it's good practice. And then you want to take a breath and take a breath and allow that interpreter to provide the information or interpret, right, for the remainder of the time. And so about 1 or 2 sentences, and that's it. Like, please don't keep talking. And then allow them a break. And really meetings, there shouldn't be more than one. An hour is even a lot. It's exhausting to have to translate, interpret between 2 languages. And so usually there's 2 if you're going to have it more than an hour-long meeting. And again, just look at the family and let the interpreter do what they're going to do. Do not ask them, like, how do you say, or what do you do? Just respect the client and the consumer as your listening partner and your speaker partner in the role, and this other person just happens to be there. Okay, so quick fixes. I know I have 10 minutes left, or 9 probably now, but our job right here is to fix service delivery. Like, we need to. So there's a problem, and we're not going to let all these individuals just like languish out there. We care. That's why we're here today too. So I know all y'all are like me. So quick fixes, like finding interpreters, healthcare interpreters. This PowerPoint is going to be available for you. So there's a certification agency, but again, it's not universal. So it's like their own, and it could cost some money. You have American Translators Association, and translation services are going to be mostly text transcription, if you think about T&T. And more medical interpreters, you've got this, certified medical interpreters. That one's about the closest that comes to being like true certifications, like costs a lot of money too. Court, and then that's it. So I want to leave you all with this, because this is a website, and again, if I click on it, let me try to see, it's demographics.virginia, spelled out, .edu, and then /.map, D-O-T-M-A-P. So I believe it's just demographics.virginia.edu.map. And if you look this up, basically what the .map does is, let me just assess my client demographics. And hypothetically speaking, they are 95% white. Well, if I live in a certain region and I click on the dot, and then I come to find out that the population of clients who are white does not reflect the demographics of my surrounding community, then I am a part of the problem. I am a part of the health disparities, the treatment disparities that occur for linguistic or cultural reasons. And so then I got to think about access. So do I want to be a part of the problem or a part of the solution? And so I will say that in our strive to just try these things out and consider these things, just have a rationale and a reason. But please don't only hire dual language staff to only work with dual language learners. It's going to be up to them, and a lot of individuals may not want to. We may think that they're dual language and proficient in both languages as hiring them, but I definitely would say they may not be. And so ask your staff before you assign them a client who you think they speak the same language, because they may not. You're welcome, Christian. That one gets me worked up. The other ones, please do not use the family members and friends of the family. There's a scope of competency in terms of translation and providing services. There's a difference between using a sibling to translate of like, hey, like, ask mom what time she's leaving to go to the store, or like what time our session has to be done. Okay, that's fine. But this sibling should not be providing translation services or interpreter services in a treatment plan meeting. I'm sorry, I've done it. And I realize now in my research that that was a horrible thing that I did. And so I thank that experience and I let it go, and I will do better. What if the family offers or sets up communication through a family member at the start, what if they did bring the older sibling to the meeting? Then I'm going to ask that sibling of how comfortable are they? Because if I do have access to interpreter services, I should at least try that first, right? And if the family says, actually, we were more comfortable with this, like she does it all the time. But I want a choice to be there. I want to respect the choice of that person who might be put in that position, because that's just how it works because of lack of access to everywhere. And if I have control over these contingencies and it's my job, I'm going to try to find an interpreter first. And then respect their choice. But at the same time, check in with that. Usually it was like a teenager or someone, and I feel for you, but I might be like, you can come if you want to, but I'm sure you have other things to do. I will find an interpreter, and usually they're grateful. And then the ethics of collaboration. So I just want to let you know that all of these things like HIPAA, third-party release, all of that is covered if you get an interpreter and you provide those things in a business setting or the home, but please don't go to Starbucks or something like that. Their scope of competency, you want to talk to them and just say, have you done this before with a therapy provider, early intervention? And you probably want to talk to any EI providers in your local communities, infant and toddler connections. They have a list because they are more mandated to do it than we are. And then again, how much information is too much at once? You want to limit your use of the interpreters and interpreters to like 30 minutes, just ideally, okay? So the recommended steps, it's not up to you as a provider. Like, ask HR. If you have an HR and it just is that one person who's in the office across from you who happens to do other things, just like ask for help. But if it's you and you are that HR and you're that business owner, then like, hold on. Conduct a needs assessment, because if it's just one family, but if you go to that dot map and you find out that maybe you're a part of the problem, that's where I would go to, okay, I'm going to ask HR for help, because we really need to make sure that we're at least offering services. The systems of care assessment is available online for free. And if for some reason a PDF comes up and it says you have to pay for it, please let me know. Just email me and I'll get it to you for free. Go over the findings. Like, yeah, we have a barrier and we're not doing our best job delivering effective treatment to the whole community. We are just parceling out the ones that look like us and speak the same language. Create an action plan. Do yourself a favor, make it 3 years. No one says that we need to do this now, and a 3-year plan is great. Short-term outcomes could be a year, and then you're thinking about the budget in the long run. And then implementation, such as hiring, training, and evaluating whether you need them. So there's all these things that I recommend changes in, right? There are all these things that come up all of the time. And I'm just quickly going through this. But here's actually what we do care about. We care about access. We care about adherence. We want to maintain and generalize. We want the quality. Our reputation is everything to us, and it's free. So the word of mouth gets you there. So you really don't want to mess that up. And then the satisfaction goes hand in hand. So if I'm going to be a sustainable business and have values-based services, because I do care about right to effective treatment and equity, then I most likely, if I have the money, I'm going to find a way to budget a full-time interpreter. So the translation services and all that stuff is in here in the references. All this, so much references, you guys. And then that's about it. So sorry for going so over, I apologize. What questions, I know we have like 5 minutes or maybe a little bit longer. What questions do you have for me?
If anyone wants to speak out loud, please do so. We want to make this into a conversation.
Hi, I had a question. Not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much. This was awesome. It's actually really timely. I'm working on my dissertation. I'm working on buy-in for ABA with bilingual families. This is awesome. I had a question though. You had mentioned, I don't know if you went into it and I missed it, but you had talked about the difference between an interpreter and a translator. Can you go over that really quick?
Yes, sorry. Thank you for reminding me to do that. So a translator is going to translate as is. So documents, if you're going to think about service delivery documents and getting them translated versus having things interpreted for you, meanings context is more conversational. So if I'm having a meeting with a family or I'm training them, but translate again is more like the textual context. It's point-to-point correspondence. And if you're officially going to, and those of you who are on right now, it's very important to know a true translation service is not going online to Google and copying and pasting your agency forms into it. It is also not just getting one person. So real translation services is forwards to backwards. So if I am enrolling, and this also goes into, so if you're doing a research, if I'm doing participants and enrolling anybody, I have to get all of my forms, and it can be quite costly or time consuming, translated both forwards and backwards for it to be legit. So what happens is I have this form in English and I give it to someone who is a translator in Spanish, and they translate it, and then they give that Spanish translation to a third person who can translate it from Spanish back into English, and then we look at the point-to-point correspondence. And so that's translation. That hopefully will show you like the difference between the two and why I wouldn't say that as an ABA provider, I'm going to be providing translation services. And as a researcher right now, it's hacks on. Dr. Garcia and I are doing a survey and like 4 different, actually, yes, this is great. But we're doing a survey right now, and it took us 4 weeks to get that done. Just this one demographic survey of like male, female, other, like what language do you speak? Just that one. So yeah. Interpreter services live also. Thank you, Valeria. That is important. So yes, interpreter services is what we want to think about when we're having meetings or interacting. Let's see right here. What about a situation where you are working outside the US and do not have access to those services? What are your thoughts on using behavior technicians in your organization? Okay, so let me actually follow up that one too. Access to the services is, I would be looking at the quality. So there was a recent publication, I think it's in my references, on the accuracy of doctors in the ER using Google Translate. And I didn't believe it at first, but it was above 80% success rate in identifying symptoms and stuff. Those are observable, measurable things. So that's why I had to step back and be like, oh, okay, I can understand. But as far as like just having a conversation and really translating our terms and our jargon, which maybe we should do anyway for just English to English, if you follow Critchfield in his research. But I would say that it's not very accurate. And so at that point right there, our best bet is to find individuals from around the world who can help each other. And I know Valeria is like one of those individuals that has been helping with some of those translation lists of some of our most common terms in behavior analysis. Good, Christian. And then the thing about thoughts on using behavior text. So what do you mean by that? As interpreters? Cassie, can you follow that up for me? As helping to interpret. Okay. You got to ask them. You have to ask them. You absolutely need to ask your staff if this is something, because it is above and beyond the duties assigned to someone who is just a monolingual. Are you paying them more? If you're not, there's a disparity right there between treatment of monolingual and bi or multilingual staff. And I think that that gets into the ethics and how we view individuals as a benefit to us. But if you can't afford to pay them more and they really willingly want to help because they care, I would make sure that we don't burn them out and just assign them individuals with all they're doing is then doing interpreting services, which again is very, very not only time consuming, but taxing like your brain. It's exhausting. You're not working on one language, you're going back and forth. So I definitely would think right now is like, why am I using them and what purpose? And then have I tried and exhausted all other measures first? And like Valeria is saying, like, I am probably not going to use them as for treatment plan meetings if I have to stick to some very like hard, difficult explanations. I would also say it shouldn't be that hard and difficult to explain. So I would probably go back to, if it's already so difficult, it's going to be too difficult for a parent or a caregiver to understand in English or whatever the primary language is. Let's see right here. Okay, good. BTs are happy to help interpret. I would pay them a stipend. I would do a reinforcer preference assessment if they are actually capable and want to help, and it's not extra, but I would say if they're doing, unless all of them can help out, I'd want to tell them that I value them for doing above and beyond. But that's me as a former director with a retention rate of 100%. Okay, who else has something? Yeah, I'm not a stickler. We started uncomfortable for a reason. Like, we value our people, and everybody has something to bring to the table. So, all right, let's see what else. Not pointing you out, Cassie, by the way. You gotta get off that soapbox so we can all get off this video webinar. Okay, Valeria, as a BCBA providing services in other languages, I don't get paid more even though it is extra service. Valeria, you set your rate, girl. I know it's with the families, but I truly, if you're gonna stick with one, and not jump back and forth and doing like because yeah, I bet, and knowing you, I bet you do translation services. Medicaid doesn't let you do that. Yeah, that's true. So, so we should give you a certificate. I don't know, Annie, we should give Valeria some kind of reward or a celebration for doing all of this. But man, oh man, if I can think of ways that we could bill for or charge more for access than monolingual ones, I don't know. I feel like you have a court case in Florida. It would have to be a quality assurance activity offered by the company. Christian, that would be a great idea. You guys are doing so well. So for those of you that are not watching this live and you're going to watch this recorded, I don't know if you get access to the comments box, but we have individuals saying that they don't get paid anymore if they're delivering Medicaid services to families who are not primary English or Spanish speakers. So if I am primary Spanish speaker and I'm delivering services to a primary Spanish speaking family, that would be like a monolingual service. If I am actually also serving as an interpreter while doing so, I'm not actually getting paid more. And so that was the point that was made. And so when we think about it, Christian was mentioning that we would have to account for, consider quality assurance that companies offer in terms of like, what is the translation or interpreter's accuracy? Like, are we making sure that they're interpreting correctly? If it's me, I know that I am saying what I mean to say. But if it's someone else, how do we do that? And the last, I would say probably the last comment for now is, yeah, money. It all comes down to money in America right now. And probably most places, but mostly America right now. And so when we think about a capitalistic structure and my bottom line is taking a hit by serving individuals that don't conform to my language or my practice or my culture, then yeah, it's an uphill battle to argue that is actually needed. So that's where I would say that the laws, if you have to scare anybody, you're not the owner, you're not the business, or you're not the admin, mention the laws. Don't tell them that they're actually not enforceable. So mention the right to effective treatment if that owner happens to be a BCBA and be like, yeah, we're just not abiding by one of these tenets. And that we're actually contributing to health disparities because I went on the dot map. It sounds like you're a problem maker if you're doing all of this right now. And this is our fake conversation, but there are ways to promote it if this is what you believe in, and then maybe as an individual, if the corporate structure doesn't actually value this, there are ways for you to. And so that's kind of where my friend and I started a free club so that I can practice my Spanish. And in the meantime, she's just curious about behavior analysis. She's a school psych, so from Cuba. And so not fee for service, it's a dinner that we have. And so there are ways where if you actually don't know anybody that speaks any other languages or and you want to, there are ways, social media and networking these days to formulate that, because I do believe that everybody wants to do better and wants to learn. And then we all have, we're in this field, right? And so we're helpers. And so we have shared values. And so I think there are commitments to wanting to improve and change that I don't even see a barter situation as needed if you want to learn. So, all right. I think that's it. For my mouth is dry and I really don't want to sip on this empty LaCroix anymore. So I think that's going to be it for me, Annie.
Thank you so much, Megan, for your presentation. It seems that a lot of folks were very much engaged with what you were saying and had a lot of comments, but a lot of feedback. So I'm very happy that a lot of folks found value in it, because we at least at the DBA sure did. So thank you so much for presenting today.
Well, thanks for having the grant and supporting Uncomfortable X, and thanks for being such a reinforcing audience, everybody. It means the world to me to have interaction and just comments. So thank you. It kept me going. So absolutely.
Great. And for those of you who are new to the Coffee and CEUs family, please know that if you're interested, I would advise for you to become a member. These talks are free every single month if you're a member, so it's not that bad. You get access to previous talks as well too. So, yeah. All right. Well, again, Megan, thank you so much. And folks, I will be sending out the presentation survey later today. And once that's filled out and you answer the questions the questions concerning this talk, I'll be able to send you a CE. Give me about a week, I promise. I'll send it out within a week. And yeah, so I hope to see you next week at our next presentation.
Yay. All right. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Annie. I'll see you later.